Welcome to Fearbound Stories. Please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now let's begin. Hospitals never really sleep. Even when visiting hours end and the daytime bustle fades, something always stirs. Machines beeping faintly in the dark, the shuffle of nurses making their late rounds, the occasional ring of a phone echoing through near-empty halls. Victor knew this better than most. He was a night security guard at one of the city's oldest hospitals. 6 months into the job, he'd grown used to the atmosphere. The hum of fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic that never left his clothes, and the eerie silence that could turn hostile in an instant. His routine was simple: patrol the halls, check the entrances, and keep watch on the camera feeds. He carried a heavy flashlight, a crackling radio, and the quiet knowledge that no one ever expected anything to happen on his shift. But on some nights, the hospital seemed to breathe differently. On some nights, he swore the walls shifted when he wasn't looking. And on one night, that fear became real. It was a little after 3 a.m., the dead hour. Victor was finishing his second round through Wing B. His boots squeaked faintly against the tile as he passed the nurse's station, which sat deserted under a flickering ceiling light. The corridor beyond should have ended in a wall. He'd walked it dozens of times before, but tonight there was a door. Victor stopped. At the far end of the hallway, a chipped wooden door stood slightly ajar. A faint draft whispered through the crack, carrying the smell of mildew and something metallic. He frowned. There wasn't supposed to be a door there. He checked the wall for signs of renovation. Nothing. The hospital maps he'd studied by heart only listed wings A and B. No third section, and yet here it was. He approached slowly, his flashlight cutting through the dim. The door's handle was rusted, paint peeling around its frame. Above it, a bulb buzzed and flickered, casting shadows that seemed to writhe against the walls. Victor hesitated, then pushed. The hinges groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Beyond the threshold stretched a long corridor he had never seen before. The air inside was different, heavy, damp, and cold enough to raise goosebumps on his arms. Dust swirled in the beam of his light. The tiles were cracked and stained, ceiling panels sagging from water damage. Old equipment lined the walls, rusted gurneys, wheelchairs missing wheels, an IV stand with its bag torn and shriveled like dry skin. Victor's heart hammered. He tapped his radio, meaning to call it in. Static answered. He tried again. Nothing but the faint hiss of dead air. He swallowed and stepped further in. The door shut softly behind him. He turned quickly, flashlight shaking in his grip. But where the door should have been was nothing but a wall. Smooth, seamless, with no sign it had ever opened. Victor's pulse pounded in his ears. He forced himself to breathe slowly. This had to be some sealed-off wing, abandoned, forgotten. Maybe the hospital had covered it up. That was the only explanation. Or so he told himself. The corridor stretched farther than it should have. He turned a corner, then another, but the hallway just kept going, each bend leading to more peeling walls, more rusting equipment. His flashlight flickered as he passed a faded sign, Wing C, restricted access. Victor froze. Wing C didn't exist. Somewhere ahead, a sound echoed. Footsteps, soft, dragging. "Hello?" he called, voice tight. "Security, who's there?" The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed against him, thick and suffocating. Then faintly a voice drifted through the air. "Help me." Victor's stomach dropped. He forced his legs forward, though every instinct screamed to run. The corridor opened into a wide ward lined with beds. Rusty frames stood empty, sheets yellowed and brittle with age. The smell of mold and disinfectant burned his nose. At the far end, a figure sat hunched on a bed. Victor lifted his light. A patient gown clung loosely to the person's thin frame. Their head hung low, hair dark and matted, hands gripping the mattress edge. "Sir?" Victor said, voice trembling. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The figure didn't move. He stepped closer. His flashlight beam trembled as it swept over the figure's fingers, long, pale, almost skeletal. Then slowly the head lifted. The face was wrong. Skin stretched too tight, eyes black hollows. A mouth twisted into something, not quite a smile, not quite a scream. Victor stumbled back, his radio clattering to the floor. The figure whispered again, "Help me!" But this time the voice wasn't alone. It carried echoes, layered like dozens of voices speaking in unison. Some high, some low, some broken with static, all overlapping in a chorus that made his skin crawl. The overhead lights buzzed violently, then burst, plunging the ward into darkness. Victor ran. His flashlight beam swung wildly as he bolted through endless corridors. The hallways twisted impossibly, bending and looping, each turn leading him deeper into a maze that should not exist. The whispers followed, sometimes behind him, sometimes ahead. "Help me." His legs burned, lungs aching. He turned another corner and froze. A wall of doors stretched before him, dozens of them, all identical. Some stood slightly open, darkness yawning inside. He tried the nearest one. It led only to another hallway, another endless stretch. The whispers grew louder, closer. "Help me!" Finally, in his panic, he slammed against a heavy metal door. It creaked open, and he tumbled out into the familiar corridor of Wing B. The nurse's station sat empty, monitors glowing faintly. When he looked back, the strange door was gone, just smooth wall where it had been. Victor staggered into the security office, drenched in sweat. He sat in front of the monitors, trying to slow his ragged breathing. But when he rewound the cameras, his blood ran cold. At 3:11 a.m., the feed showed him walking, not in Wing B, but down a hallway that didn't exist. And just for a moment, the camera caught a shadow walking beside him, long, stretched, following closely. He never spoke of it to anyone, but sometimes on quiet nights as he patrols those halls, he hears it again. Soft, faint, "Help me." Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Warehouses are strange places after dark. During the day, they're full of noise, forklifts buzzing down aisles, boxes thudding onto pallets, workers shouting over the echo. But once night falls and the last shift clocks out, all that's left is silence. A silence so heavy that every sound seems amplified. The hum of the lights, the scuff of boots, even your own breathing. Carlos knew this silence well. He had worked security at a massive distribution warehouse for 3 years. His job was straightforward: patrol the aisles, check the loading docks, lock up entrances, and keep an eye on the camera feeds from the office. Most nights were uneventful. But he never liked being alone inside that building. The rows of shelves stretched up 40 feet, stacked with thousands of boxes. The aisles felt like canyons, the metal racks rising into shadow. Sometimes, walking them, Carlos swore the shelves pressed in around him. He would hear echoes, footsteps, breathing, that weren't his own. Still, nothing ever happened, nothing he could prove, until the night the lights stopped obeying. It was a little before 2 a.m. Carlos was making his second round. He carried his heavy flashlight, though most of the building was lit by overhead fluorescents. The air smelled faintly of dust, cardboard, and machine oil. As he rounded into row 14, one of the lights flickered. He sighed. The wiring in this place was ancient. He made a mental note to add it to the log, but as he walked farther, another light buzzed and snapped on. One he knew he had turned off earlier that night. He frowned. The night routine was strict. Certain aisles stayed dark to save power. He had personally checked them. He walked to the breaker box at the end of the row, flipped the switch, and the light died with a hum. But as he turned, the row behind him lit up. Then another, and another, until a path of glowing white stretched across the warehouse floor, leading deeper inside. Carlos's skin prickled. He called out, voice echoing against the steel racks. "Hello? Anyone in here?" His words died in the cavernous space. No answer. He clicked his radio, but only static hissed back. The lights ahead buzzed impatiently, as if daring him forward. Against every instinct, he followed. The lit path wound between endless shelves, turning corners, drawing him toward the farthest side of the warehouse, an area used so rarely it might as well have been abandoned. Dust coated the floor. Old pallets leaned against the walls. At the end of the path, one final light glowed above a loading bay door. The door was sealed shut, chained years ago after a worker was injured. Carlos remembered the incident vaguely. A forklift accident, maybe. He couldn't recall the details. He reached for the chain. That's when every light in the warehouse snapped off. Darkness slammed down like a weight. Carlos's breath hitched. He fumbled with his flashlight, thumb clicking the switch until a weak beam cut through the black. The silence was worse now. The building felt enormous, hollow, alive. Then he heard it. A scrape, slow, heavy. Something dragging against the concrete floor. He spun, light jerking across endless shelves. Nothing. The scrape came again, closer. "Who's there?" he shouted, but his voice cracked. The sound stopped. He forced his legs to move, walking fast, then faster. The flashlight beam swung wildly across the racks, catching nothing but dust and boxes. Then just ahead, movement. A figure. Standing in the aisle. Carlos froze. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly brushing the steel beams above. It stood perfectly still, body shrouded in shadow, head tilted slightly, watching. "Hey!" Carlos barked, though fear tightened his throat. "You can't be in here!" The figure didn't move. He lifted the flashlight higher. The beam washed over the aisle, and the space was empty. Nothing there. Carlos's heart hammered. He turned and ran, boots pounding against concrete. But no matter which way he turned, the aisles looked wrong. Row 14 should have led back toward the office, but instead, it seemed to stretch on endlessly. Every corner brought him to another row he didn't recognize. And then the lights began snapping on again. Click, click, click. One after another, blazing above him in sequence, leading him forward like runway lights. He didn't want to follow, but his body moved anyway. Each time he tried to turn away, the darkness pressed in thicker, the air heavier. Finally, the path ended at the same loading bay door. Only now, it was open. Blackness yawned beyond. Carlos's flashlight flickered violently. He raised it, hand trembling, and saw them. Dozens of figures, standing just inside the darkness of the bay. All tall, all perfectly still, heads tilting from side to side in unison. Whispers rippled through the air, faint like static on a broken TV. Carlos stumbled back. The chain on the door rattled, though no one touched it. Then, without warning, the lights overhead exploded, showering sparks, plunging everything into complete black. Carlos ran. He sprinted through aisles that seemed to bend and twist, shelves stretching impossibly tall, shadows jerking alongside him. The scraping followed. Louder now, pounding, like something huge dragging itself after him. He burst through a final row and slammed into the security office door. He shoved it open, fell inside and locked it. The room glowed bright, monitors humming. His chest heaved, sweat pouring down his face. For a moment, silence. Then he looked at the monitors. On one screen, row 14 glowed with bright light. and at the center of the aisle stood a figure. Still, head tilted. Another camera flickered. Now there were two. Another flickered. Three. Each camera showed more of them, standing in different aisles, motionless, always facing the camera. The screens buzzed, lines of static crawling across. Carlos reached for the power switch, but before he could, the monitors went black. Every single one, except one, the feed from the office itself, the camera over his shoulder. And on that screen, Carlos saw it. A tall figure standing just behind him, tilting its head. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Malls are never really empty. Even after closing, when the last customer leaves and the steel gates slam shut, something lingers in the air. The faint smell of food court grease, the hum of the air conditioning, the echo of footsteps that aren't there anymore. Anthony had been a mall security guard long enough to get used to the quiet. Or so he thought. His shift started like every other. He patrolled the first floor, flashlight beam glinting off glass storefronts. He tugged on gates, checked the loading docks, passed through the silent food court, where the smell of fried food never quite went away. It was dull work, but he preferred dull. The mall was built in the 1970s, and it showed. Cracks in the tile, faded murals, escalators that groaned when they moved. But Anthony didn't mind. He thought of the place as a sleeping giant, big, quiet, harmless. Until the night it woke up. It started in the security office. Anthony sat watching the monitors, sipping stale coffee when something caught his eye. A clothing store on the first floor. One of the mannequins had moved. At first he thought it was his imagination. The figure stood at the front of the display, dressed in jeans and a white shirt, head tilted toward the gate. He rewound the feed. Half an hour earlier, the mannequin had been facing the back wall. Anthony leaned closer, heart thudding. He fast-forwarded. At 12:47 a.m., the mannequin moved again. Its head turned slowly until it faced the camera directly. Anthony grabbed his radio. "You seeing this?" he asked his partner upstairs. "Only static." He frowned. The radios had never cut out before. He pushed back from the desk, grabbed his flashlight, and decided to check for himself. The mall was colder now, eerily still. His footsteps echoed as he walked the tiled corridors. Storefronts gleamed with faint reflections. The background music, usually set on a timer, had stopped hours ago. Silence pressed in from all sides. When he reached the clothing store, he froze. The mannequin stood exactly where he'd seen it, face blank, head tilted toward the gate. Its hand now gripped one of the metal bars. Anthony's flashlight trembled. He swept the beam across the shop. Dozens of mannequins stood frozen in place, dressed in summer outfits. One of them, in the back row, was turned completely sideways, facing him. He stumbled back, muttering, "You're just tired." But when the gate rattled suddenly, he nearly dropped the flashlight. The mannequin at the front had shifted closer. Its hand pressed flat against the glass. Anthony bolted. Back in the security office, he tried the monitors again. His blood went cold. In store after store, mannequins were moving. One tilted its head. Another turned its whole body. In the toy store, a mannequin leaned against the glass, blank face pressed flat, fogging the pain. And then, on one monitor, a mannequin walked out of frame. Anthony blinked, leaned closer. That wasn't possible. But the feed didn't lie. The mannequin was gone. He radioed his partner again. Nothing. He had to find him. Anthony took the escalator up to the second floor. Halfway up, he froze. Every mannequin in sight, behind glass, behind gates, had turned toward him. Dozens of blank faces, all tilted, watching him rise. Anthony's stomach dropped. He forced himself off the escalator and scanned the corridor. That's when he saw it. Down the hall, Silhouetted against the skylight stood a lone figure. Not a mannequin, too tall, too thin. It tilted its head and stepped backward into shadow. Anthony ran after it, boots echoing like gunshots. He rounded the corner. Nothing. Only silence. But the mannequins had moved again. Now they were pressed against the glass. Dozens of faceless heads leaning forward, hands flat against the barrier as though desperate to escape. The sound of scraping plastic filled the hall. Anthony turned and sprinted back the way he came. When he burst into the security office, sweat dripping down his neck, the monitors all flickered at once. Every camera showed the same feed. Not the mall, not the hallways, but the inside of the office. From every angle, Anthony's stomach flipped. He spun with his flashlight. The office was empty, but on the monitors, mannequins stood in the corners of the room. Closer, closer. Every screen showed them inching toward the camera. Anthony dropped his flashlight. His breath came in shallow gasps. Then the screens went black. For a heartbeat, the office was silent. Then a faint click. One monitor lit back up, the camera facing the hallway outside. Anthony leaned forward, throat dry. A mannequin stood outside the office door. Its plastic hand lifted, pressing slowly against the glass. Anthony staggered back, eyes wide, and the screen went black again. He quit the next morning. But sometimes when he passes the mall on his way home, he swears he sees them. Behind the high glass windows, mannequins standing not in displays, but pressed against the glass, faces turned toward the street, as if waiting for him. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Prisons are never truly silent. Even in the small hours of the night, the air is alive with sound. The clang of distant doors, the hum of generators, the cough or mutter of an inmate in their cell. Guards get used to it. They have to. But silence in a prison is different. It feels wrong, heavy, almost watched. Derek had worked as a correctional officer for nearly a decade. He thought he'd grown immune to fear inside those walls. He'd seen fights break out, weapons smuggled in, riots sparked over nothing. He'd broken them up, patched his bruises, and gone back to work. But one night in the isolation wing, a night that began like any other, made him reconsider everything he thought he knew. His shift began at 11 p.m. The prison was quiet, most inmates already locked down for the night. The isolation block was his responsibility until morning. It was a long, narrow corridor with 24 cells. Some held violent inmates in solitary. Others stood empty, their paint peeling, their walls damp. The air was always cooler here, as if the building itself didn't want anyone to linger. Derek walked his rounds, flashlight sweeping across steel bars, boots echoing against concrete. He checked the clipboard. Most cells were occupied by men too tired to cause trouble. Then he reached cell 19 and froze. A sound drifted from inside. Banging. Slow, rhythmic, like fists pounding against steel. Derek frowned. He flipped his clipboard. Cell 19 had been empty for months. No one assigned, no maintenance listed. The last inmate who'd stayed there had died 2 years ago of a heart attack. He listened. The banging continued. He leaned toward the bars, flashlight beam sweeping the interior. And for just a moment, he swore he saw someone. A figure standing in the far corner, head bowed, arms slack at its sides. "Hey!" Derek barked, forcing authority into his voice. "Who's in there?" The figure didn't move. Derek radioed the control booth. "Check 19 for me. Thought this cell was unoccupied?" Static filled his earpiece, then a voice crackled back. "It is. Cell 19's empty." Derek's stomach knotted. He swung his flashlight back toward the corner. Empty. Only the rusted bed frame and a stained mattress sat inside. But the banging kept going. Heart pounding, Derek unlocked the cell and stepped inside. The air changed instantly. It was colder, damper. His breath puffed faintly in front of him. He checked under the bed. Nothing. He checked the corners. Nothing. He leaned toward the bathroom alcove, light catching rust and mildew. Nothing. Then, the sound exploded beside his ear. He spun, flashlight jerking. The cell was empty, but the metal door shuddered violently, as though something was striking it from the outside. Derek bolted into the corridor. The banging stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt alive. Back in the control booth, he pulled up the camera feed for cell 19. At 2:33 a.m., the cell was empty. At 2:34, a figure appeared. Thin, pale, wearing an old inmate uniform, the type phased out years ago. It stood perfectly still in the corner. At 2:35, it lifted its head toward the camera. Its eyes were hollow sockets. Its mouth gaped open as though screaming, but no sound came through. The screen flickered. When it returned, the cell was empty again. Derek called 2 other officers. Together, they returned to the cell. All 3 checked inside. Nothing. But when they stepped out, Derek glanced back. A pale hand gripped the bars for just a moment before sliding into shadow. The other guards swore they didn't see it. Unable to shake it, Derek asked around about cell 19. One older guard finally spoke. He remembered the man who died there, a violent inmate, paranoid, always banging on the door at night, shouting about someone in the cell with him. Guards dismissed it as madness, but he was found dead one morning, body cold, eyes wide with terror, mouth frozen mid-scream. Since then, some officers claim they heard banging in the empty cell. Others refused to patrol the isolation block alone. Derek never told them what he saw. Still, the banging continued. Some nights faint, some nights violent, rattling the bars so hard the whole block seemed to shake. And sometimes, if he passed quietly enough, Derek swore he heard something else beneath the noise. A whisper, low, ragged. Let me out. Before we move on to the next story, give us your verdict on this one. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Office towers don't feel alive at night. They feel abandoned. During the day, they're buzzing hives of life. The chatter of meetings, the ringing of phones, the hum of elevators going up and down non-stop. But once everyone leaves and the cleaners finish their rounds, a stillness sets in that is almost unnatural. The fluorescent lights seem too bright. The polished glass reflects back empty corridors. Even the air feels heavier, as though the building resents being left alone. Martin had worked security in one such high-rise for over 5 years. 30 stories of glass, steel, and secrets. He thought he knew every inch of it. But one night, he realized the tower had floors that weren't supposed to exist. It began a little after 3 a.m. Martin was stationed at the front desk in the lobby, sipping stale coffee, the giant glass doors reflecting the empty streets outside. That's when the elevator chimed. He frowned. Nobody should have been using it. The last employees had left hours ago. The doors slid open with a ding. Empty. Martin was about to dismiss it as a glitch when the panel lit up. Floor 17. He grabbed his flashlight, muttering, "Here we go," and stepped inside. The doors closed, and the elevator began to rise. But the ride felt wrong. Too long. Too quiet. The hum of the motor echoed hollowly, and Martin found himself staring at his reflection in the brushed steel walls, distorted and stretched. At last, the door slid open. Floor 17. The hallway was dark. Martin stepped out cautiously, beam cutting across closed office doors. The carpets muffled his footsteps. The air smelled stale, as though no one had worked here in years. But he knew this floor. People worked here every day. He'd seen them, yet now it felt abandoned. He checked the stairwell, locked from the inside. He swept the corridor again. Nothing. The silence pressed too close. He turned back to the elevator. The panel was glowing again. Basement. Martin's skin prickled. He hadn't pressed anything. The doors yawned open. Waiting. Against his better judgment, he stepped back inside. The doors sealed shut, and the car began its descent. Past the lobby, past the first basement, past the second. Then the panel flickered. Martin's heart jumped. There was no third basement. The building only had two, yet the car slowed. And the doors opened. The air that met him was damp and foul, smelling of rust and mildew. The floor looked unfinished. Concrete walls, exposed pipes, puddles reflecting his light. He stepped out. His boots crunched on dust thick as powder. Rooms lined the corridor, not offices. Cells, narrow spaces with desks bolted to the floor. The paint on the walls peeled in long strips, and the overhead lights buzzed faintly, though he could see no wires connecting them. At the far end of the hall stood another elevator. Its doors were open. Inside, a figure waited. It was tall, thin, dressed in a business suit decades out of fashion. Its face was pale, features blurred, eyes dark voids. The figure tilted its head, as though studying him. Martin's breath caught. His flashlight trembled. The figure smiled faintly. The doors began to close and sealed shut. Martin bolted back to his own elevator, panic clawing up his throat. He jabbed the buttons wildly. The doors shut, and the car rocketed upward, faster than it should, humming loud enough to rattle his teeth. At last it stopped. The panel read lobby. The door slid open. Martin stepped out and froze. It wasn't the lobby. The walls were bare concrete, the ceiling low, the air thick with dust. Behind him, the elevator doors closed. The panel above them flickered. Martin staggered forward, searching desperately for stairs, another exit, anything. But the hall stretched endlessly, lined with doors. Some stood ajar, revealing offices filled with outdated typewriters, phones with rotary dials, filing cabinets stuffed with papers yellowed with age. All of it frozen, as if abandoned decades ago. Then he heard it, the ding of an elevator. He turned. At the end of the hall, the duplicate elevator stood open again. This time, several figures waited inside, all tall, all thin, all smiling faintly. Martin ran. The hall twisted, bent, led him in circles. No matter which way he turned, he ended up back at the elevator doors. The panel above them flickered. The car opened. Darkness yawned inside. Something moved in the shadows. Dozens of hands, pale and reaching, groping outward. Martin screamed, slamming the stairwell door. It opened easily this time, and he bolted upward. Up and up, lungs burning, legs screaming. When he burst through a final door, he found himself in the real lobby. The night guard on relief stared at him in confusion. "You okay?" Martin could barely speak. His flashlight slipped from his shaking hands. Hours later, when they checked the cameras, the footage showed Martin stepping into the elevator at 3:02 a.m. But he never came back out, not on any floor. The car was empty, yet in one blurry frame just before the feed glitched, a figure could be seen standing behind him. Tall, thin, smiling. You've just crossed the boundary between reality and the unknown. If you felt the fear tonight, make sure to subscribe before you leave, because on this channel every story is just the beginning. New nightmares arrive every few nights, each one darker than the last. Until then, keep your lights low, your doors locked, and your mind open. You are now part of the fear-bound family.